Hey guys, you're here for another installment from Force 15. So this is the 2015 East Pacific hurricane season so far. Started off quite intense actually. May 28, forming Hurricane Andres, formed as Tropical Depression 1E. Storm meandered for a little while as a tropical storm before intensifying quite quickly into a hurricane, intensifying on May 29th at 2100 UTC. Andres intensified to a Category 1 hurricane, and by 1500 UTC on May 30th, cyclone further strengthened into a Category 2 hurricane. The storm became a Category 4 on June 1st at 300 UTC. Andres ultimately reached its peak intensity early on June 1st with winds of 150 miles an hour, and at one point the storm was actually expected to become a Category 5 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale, although it only topped out with winds of 150 miles an hour, and that's what we call one of the bottlers. Although I think the proper bottler would be 155. And then we're moving on to Hurricane Blanca, also a Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Winds of 140 miles an hour, forming on May 31st and dissipating on June 9th. Kind of taking the same track to Hurricane Odile of 2014, although only making landfall on the Baja California Peninsula as a tropical storm and not a Category 3 hurricane. The storm finally did peak with winds of 140 miles an hour on June 3rd, and then the storm went through an eyewall replacement cycle on June 4th, which did weaken the storm. Also, low sea surface temperatures also did weaken the storm too. The storm did reach a second peak though at winds of 130 miles an hour after rapidly re-intensifying, after going over some warmer waters again, but thereafter cooler waters and southeasterly wind shear prompted a weakening phase once more. After weakening to a tropical storm on June 7th, Blanca made a landfall around 1200 UTC on Puerto Cortez, I think that is, with winds of 45 miles an hour, and became the earliest incident of a landfall on the Baja California Peninsula since records began in 1949. Thereafter, Blanca weakened into a tropical depression before degenerating into a remnant low early on June 9th as the convection diminished. Hurricane Carlos was next, forming on June 10th and dissipating on June 17th, although only attaining peak winds of 90 miles an hour, Category 1 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Pressure was 978 millibars, though I don't believe it didn't actually make landfall, or did it? I don't think it did actually. But if it did, it was only as a very small tropical depression. And the storm did actually become a Category 1 hurricane twice, but ultimately, let's see. No, it did not make landfall in Carlos, dissipated just before landfall. Tropical Storm Ela was next, forming on July 8th and dissipating on July 10th. Not a really an impressive storm, only a minimal tropical storm. Although that is one of the 6 storms, no, 5 storms even, and it was it's only one of 5 storms to become a tropical depression in the East Pacific, but not become a tropical storm until entering the Central Pacific Ocean. And then again, Tropical Storm Halola became a Category 2 hurricane outside the East Pacific Basin. Was only a 60 mile per hour tropical storm in the Central Pacific. And the air pressure was 999 millibars. But it was still an interesting storm, and I think it has actually made it as far as Japan was expected to. Then next is Tropical Storm Ioun. Again, minimal tropical storm, not really that impressive. We'll move straight on from that. Hurricane Dolores, another Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Air pressure is 9.4 millibars. Peak wind speeds were 130 miles an hour. Storm formed on July 11th, dissipated on July 19th. Storm didn't actually make landfall, but was still an interesting storm. Third Category 4 hurricane of the season. Not making any landfalls though. And finally, so far, latest storm is Tropical Storm Enrique. And the storm formed on July 12th, dissipated on July 18th. Not really, and also not really impressive storm. 50 miles an hour, air pressure 1,000 millibars. But still, yeah. Although now we're looking at a new area of interest, Invest 99E, which is a possibility of forming, which could become next storm. Tropical Depression 6E is a possibility of forming. Although actually I think it's Tropical Depression 7. No, it's Tropical Depression 6. No, it's so the next storm, 1990, is probably going to become Tropical Depression 6 and possibly becoming a hurricane as well. So we'll keep you posted on that. That's all from me now, guys. Thank you guys for watching. This is Force 15 signing off.